at 12:47 p.m., February 18, 1945. Private First Class Domingo Mingo Salcedo, 23rd Infantry Regiment, Philippine Commonwealth Army, crouched behind a collapsed nipa hut 70 meters from 17 Imperial Japanese Army positions dug into the eastern ridge of Mount Samat, Bataan. The farmer's bamboo cannon he'd insisted on hauling through 3 kilometers of jungle sat half-assembled beside him, dismissed by every officer who'd seen it as agricultural nonsense with no place in modern warfare. Captain Herrera's heavy mortar team lay pinned 400 meters to his south, their steel tubes useless against bunkers they couldn't see. In approximately 90 seconds, the enemy's Type 92 heavy machine gun would complete its traverse and cut through what remained of B Company's defensive line. Sometimes the most devastating weapon in war isn't forged in a factory, it's grown in a field. Before we dive in, I want to know, where are you listening to the story from? Drop your city or country in the comments right now, and let's see which corner of the world has the most war legend fans. Don't just scroll, type it out. Your comment might get featured in the next story. The morning had begun with failure. 3 separate attempts to dislodge the Japanese position had collapsed in blood and confusion. American artillery observers positioned on the opposite slope had exhausted their grid coordinates trying to mark targets concealed beneath triple canopy jungle. The enemy had learned from 2 years of island warfare. Their bunkers were masterpieces of camouflage, built into natural depressions, reinforced with stolen railroad ties, and positioned to create interlocking fields of fire that turned every approach into a killing ground. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, the American liaison officer attached to the 23rd Infantry, had personally vetoed the use of unproven local weapons after inspecting Salcedo's bamboo cannon during the previous night's equipment check. The device looked absurd to trained military eyes. Segments of giant bamboo, some measuring 8 inches in diameter, bound together with rattan strips and coconut fiber, with a firing mechanism that appeared to be nothing more than a modified carbide lamp trigger. Morrison had actually laughed a short, sharp bark of contempt before ordering Salcedo to stick to carrying ammunition like a proper private. But Salcedo had carried the bamboo anyway. He'd lashed the segments to his pack frame, adding 23 pounds to his combat load, and ignored the jokes from his squad mates. They called it Lantaka Ang Bobo the Idiot's Cannon. One corporal suggested he was planning to grow vegetables behind enemy lines. Another offered to help him plant rice after the battle. Salcedo had smiled at each jibe, said nothing, and kept walking. Now, with the Type 92's barrel swinging toward their position like the minute hand of a clock counting down to execution, nobody was laughing. The bamboo segments lay in the mud beside him, still bound together in their transport configuration. Salcedo's hands moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd assembled this weapon 500 times in preparation for a moment that everyone else had promised would never come. His fingers found the release knot special slip knots his grandfather had taught him for securing water buffalo, and the segments separated cleanly into their component parts. Segment 1, firing chamber. Segment 2, barrel extension. Segment 3, stabilizer frame. The Type 92 machine gun opened fire. Rounds chewed through the collapsed nipa hut, sending splinters of bamboo and palm frond whipping through the air like horizontal rain. Someone screamed, "Private Reyes!" hit in the shoulder, already being dragged backward by the platoon medic. The gun's tracer rounds drew bright orange lines through the smoke, a geometry of death that was systematically erasing every piece of cover B Company possessed. Salcedo kept assembling. His hands didn't shake. He'd anticipated this, the noise, the fear, the certainty of incoming fire during hundreds of hours of mental rehearsal. The first segment locked into the second with a satisfying thunk as the interior nodes aligned. The bamboo was living material, dried but not dead, retaining the natural tensile strength that had allowed these plants to bend in typhoon winds without breaking. Modern metallurgy created barrels that could withstand explosive force through crystalline structure and precisely engineered tolerances. Bamboo achieved the same result through millions of years of evolutionary pressure, developing a cellular matrix that could absorb and redirect energy along its length. Captain Herrera's voice crackled through the radio, distorted by static and explosions. All units fall back to secondary line. Repeat, fall back to. The transmission died in a squeal of interference as Japanese mortars found the command post. Salcedo lifted the assembled bamboo cannon and rested it across the remains of a water basin. The weapon was 4 feet long, weighed approximately 18 pounds, and looked like something a child might build during a lazy afternoon in the provinces. Its barrel was smooth bamboo, its firing chamber was reinforced with woven rattan, and its projectiles were sitting in a repurposed ammunition pouch. Glass bottles filled with gasoline, stuffed with rags, fitted with improvised impact fuses made from modified blasting caps. He tried to explain it to Lieutenant Colonel Morrison during the equipment inspection. The physics were simple. Bamboo's natural structure created a barrel with internal rifling formed by the plant's growth nodes. The fiber alignment provided directional stability. The hollow chamber allowed for expansion gases to distribute evenly, reducing recoil while maintaining muzzle velocity. And most importantly, the organic composition meant the weapon produced almost no metallic signature. No heat bloom, no magnetic disturbance, nothing that Japanese field detection equipment had been designed to identify. Morrison had cut him off mid-sentence. "Son, I've got degrees in mechanical engineering from West Point. Don't lecture me on physics using a garden plat." Salcedo had saluted, said yes sir, and privately resolved to prove every word correct. Domingo Salcedo was 26 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, and had never finished secondary school. He'd grown up in the municipality of Hermosa, Bataan, where his family had cultivated rice and vegetables on 7 hectares of land that had belonged to the Salcedos for 4 generations. His father was a tenant farmer who'd worked the same fields since childhood. His mother sold produce at the Balanga market. Domingo was the third of 6 children, notable primarily for being unremarkable, a quiet boy who did his chores without complaint, attended school when planting season allowed, and demonstrated no particular aptitude for anything except patient observation. The observation part mattered more than anyone realized. While other boys played sipa or practiced arnis in the village square, Domingo spent hours watching his grandfather work bamboo. The old man, Apolinario Salcedo, called Lolo Pole by everyone in the barangay, had been a master craftsman before age bent his spine and stiffened his fingers. He could transform raw bamboo into water pipes, furniture, fishing poles, or musical instruments with nothing more than a bolo knife and patience. Domingo would sit cross-legged in the workshop, silent and attentive, absorbing techniques that Lolo Pole had learned from his grandfather during the Spanish colonial period. "Bamboo remembers," the old man told him once, running gnarled fingers along a freshly cut segment. "It grows toward the sun, bends in the wind, stands through typhoons. If you work with the grain, it's stronger than steel. If you fight against it, it shatters. The Japanese think strength comes from metal and discipline. We know it comes from flexibility and understanding." Domingo had filed that lesson away without fully comprehending its implications. The war arrived in Hermosa on December 22, 1941, when Japanese aircraft strafed the coastal highway. Domingo was in the fields, transplanting rice seedlings, when he heard the engines. He looked up and saw 3 Mitsubishi A6M fighters in perfect formation, their wings flashing as they banked toward the road. The .5 caliber rounds kicked up geysers of dirt and asphalt. A bus full of evacuees trying to reach Manila exploded in a fireball that turned the afternoon sky black. Domingo enlisted the next morning. The Philippine Commonwealth Army didn't ask many questions in late 1941. They needed bodies to fill uniforms, warm hearts to carry rifles, and sufficient courage to stand in front of the Imperial Japanese Army's southward advance. Domingo became Private Salcedo, assigned to the 23rd Infantry Regiment, issued a Springfield rifle manufactured in 1903, and given 3 days of training before being told to dig foxholes on the Bataan Peninsula. His commanding officers quickly categorized him adequate but unremarkable. He followed orders. He didn't complain. He could hit a man-sized target at 100 meters if given enough ammunition to zero his weapon properly. He volunteered for unpleasant duties: latrine digging, ammunition carrying, perimeter guard during the graveyard shift without seeking recognition. In the Army's vast machinery of organized violence, Domingo Salcedo was a perfectly serviceable cog, reliable, replaceable, and utterly forgettable. Nobody knew he spent his off-duty hours sketching weapon designs in a notebook salvaged from a destroyed schoolhouse. The sketches started as idle doodling. a way to occupy his mind during the long hours between patrol rotations. But after the first month of combat, they evolved into something more systematic. Domingo had noticed a problem that nobody seemed willing to acknowledge. The Philippine Commonwealth Army's artillery was catastrophically inadequate for jungle warfare. American-designed howitzers were built for open-field combat in European theaters. They required clear sightlines, flat terrain, and surveyed firing positions. Bataan offered none of these things. The Japanese, by contrast, had perfected the art of concealment. Their bunkers were invisible for more than 50 meters. Their machine gun nests were positioned inside natural caves, underneath fallen logs, or built into the root systems of massive bolete trees. Conventional artillery couldn't hit what it couldn't see, and aerial observation was useless beneath triple canopy jungle. Domingo started wondering, what if the weapon didn't need to be conventional? He remembered Lolopol's bamboo water pipe segments joined together to carry liquid across vast distances through nothing but gravitational pressure and careful alignment. He remembered the lantaka, the ancient Filipino swivel guns made from brass or bronze, which had defended coastal villages against Moro raiders for centuries. He remembered the physics lessons from his 1 year of secondary school: pressure, expansion, trajectory, force distribution. And he remembered something his grandfather had showed him when he was 12 years old: a bamboo segment filled with carbide and water, sealed with mud, and detonated using a spark from flint and steel. The explosion had blown the sealed end 30 meters across a rice paddy. Lolopol had laughed at young Domingo's shocked expression and said, "This is why bamboo is sacred. It gives us everything: food, shelter, tools, and when necessary, thunder." Thunder. Domingo began experimenting during the brief periods when the regiment rotated to rear positions for rest and resupply. He requisitioned bamboo from local villages. Easy enough, since the plant grew everywhere and nobody questioned a Filipino soldier gathering construction materials. He tested different diameters, different lengths, different binding techniques. He calculated internal volumes and expansion ratios using math he'd half forgotten from school. He built firing mechanisms from salvaged weapon parts, modified blasting caps, and improvised igniters. His squad mates thought he'd lost his mind. "Salsteo's building furniture while we're fighting a war," one sergeant joked during a supply run. The comment drew laughs from everyone except Domingo, who simply nodded and continued wrapping rattan binding around a bamboo segment with the focused intensity of a jeweler setting diamonds. The breakthrough came on January 30th, 1945, during a Japanese artillery barrage. Domingo was in a foxhole, listening to enemy shells scream overhead, when he noticed something critical: the sound signature. Japanese Type 94 mountain guns produced a distinctive whistle shriek as their shells traveled downrange, a noise created by air friction across the projectile's metal casing. But American mortar rounds sounded different, a deeper, fluttering whoosh that suggested less aerodynamic resistance. The difference came down to materials and construction. Smooth metal created predictable airflow. Textured organic materials created turbulence that actually stabilized the projectile through boundary layer manipulation. Bamboo was textured. Bamboo was natural nodes that created precisely spaced ridges along its interior surface. Bamboo, Domingo suddenly realized, was already rifled. He spent the next week building a functional prototype. The final design consisted of 3 main components: a firing chamber made from thick-walled bamboo, reinforced with woven coconut fiber, a barrel made from smaller diameter bamboo segments aligned with obsessive precision, and a firing mechanism adapted from a captured Japanese grenade. The projectiles were improvised incendiaries, glass bottles filled with gasoline, and fitted with impact fuses, because Domingo had observed that Japanese bunkers, despite their camouflage, were still built with wood and earth that would burn if given sufficient thermal encouragement. He tested it exactly once, in a cleared area behind the regimental aid station, firing at a target made from stacked sandbags 60 meters away. The bamboo cannon worked. The projectile flew in a stable arc, impacted precisely where Domingo had aimed, and exploded with enough force to scatter sandbags across a 5-meter radius. The weapon produced minimal smoke, almost no muzzle flash, and a firing report that sounded like a loud thump rather than the sharp crack of conventional artillery. Domingo requested an audience with his company commander to demonstrate the weapon. Captain Herrera listened politely, watched the second test firing, and then declined to forward the recommendation to battalion headquarters. "It's clever, Salcedo," the captain said, lighting a cigarette with hands that trembled from too little sleep and too much combat. "But we can't retrain artillery crews on experimental weapons in the middle of an active campaign. Stick with what works. That's how we win wars." Domingo saluted, said, "Yes, sir," and kept building bamboo cannons anyway. By mid-February, he'd constructed 4 complete weapons and stockpiled 37 improvised projectiles. Nobody ordered him to stop because nobody important enough to issue such orders had actually noticed what he was doing. He was just Private Salcedo, the quiet farmer from Hermosa, doing something harmless in his spare time. The strategic situation on Bataan was deteriorating with mathematical precision. American and Filipino forces, retreating from superior Japanese numbers, had established offensive lines across the peninsula with the goal of delaying the enemy advance long enough for reinforcements to arrive from Australia. Those reinforcements were not coming, a fact that everyone from General MacArthur down to the newest recruit understood, but nobody stated officially. The defensive strategy had devolved into a desperate holding action, trade space for time, trade lives for days, and hope that something changed before complete collapse. The Japanese understood this perfectly. Their tactical approach reflected brutal efficiency. Identify strong defensive positions, fix them with frontal probes, then systematically eliminate them using superior artillery and air support. They didn't need to win quickly. They just needed to win inevitably, grinding down Allied resistance through attrition until surrender became the only rational choice. Mount Samat represented the keystone of the entire defensive line. The mountain, more accurately, a large hill rising 550 meters above the surrounding jungle, dominated the central Bataan Peninsula. Whoever controlled Samat controlled observation over both coasts, artillery placement for the entire sector, and supply routes connecting northern and southern defensive positions. American planners had fortified it extensively, building bunkers, trenches, and machine gun nests across every approach. They'd positioned the 23rd Infantry Regiment on the eastern slope specifically because that approach offered the steepest terrain and densest jungle theoretically, the least likely avenue for a major Japanese assault. The Japanese attacked it anyway. They began with 3 days of preliminary bombardment, using mountain guns hauled through terrain that American planners had deemed impassable to artillery. The shells came in waves, methodical, precise, devastating. They walked up the slope in carefully calculated increments, obliterating one defensive position before moving to the next. American counter-battery fire proved ineffective because the Japanese guns were positioned inside caves, fired 3 or 4 rounds, then relocated before return fire arrived. When the bombardment ended, Japanese infantry emerged from the jungle like a rising tide. They moved in small units, never more than 8 men together, using the terrain with an expertise that American tactical doctrine hadn't anticipated. They didn't charge blindly at fixed positions. They infiltrated through gaps, established positions behind Allied lines, and created confusion that multiplied their effective strength. Radio communications broke down. Unit cohesion fractured. The carefully planned defensive grid dissolved into isolated pockets of resistance, fighting separate battles without coordination or support. By February 17, the eastern ridge had become untenable. The ridge itself was a geological feature approximately 800 meters long, running north-south along Mount Samat's eastern face. Dense jungle covered its slopes, narrow trees, bamboo thickets, and tangled undergrowth that reduced visibility to less than 20 meters in most locations. The Japanese had established 17 fortified positions along the ridge's crest, each one invisible from the air and mutually supporting through precisely calculated fields of fire. American artillery observers had tried everything. They'd called in fire missions using map coordinates, sound bearings, and estimated ranges. The shells had done magnificent work destroying jungle, but the bunkers remained intact. They'd requested airstrikes, but the Army Air Corps had been reduced to fewer than a dozen operational aircraft in the Philippines, and none could be spared for tactical support missions. They'd even attempted a direct infantry assault on February 16 B Company, 23rd Infantry, 137 men attacking uphill through the jungle at dawn. 43 men made it back. The Type 92 heavy machine gun had done most of the killing. It was positioned somewhere near the ridge's center, camouflaged so effectively that nobody could determine its exact location even after it had been firing for hours. Its interlocking fields of fire with other positions created a kill zone that was mathematically perfect. Every possible approach angle was covered, every piece of potential cover was pre-targeted, and every attempt at flanking movement ran directly into another hidden bunker. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, coordinating the defense from battalion headquarters, had sent increasingly desperate requests for naval gunfire support. The requests were denied. The Navy had withdrawn its ships beyond range of Japanese air attack. He'd requested heavy bombers from Darwin. The request was acknowledged, but not fulfilled. Every available aircraft was committed to defending Australia itself. He'd finally requested permission to withdraw and establish new defensive lines further west. That request was also denied. Mount Samat will be held, came the reply from division headquarters. No further retrograde movements authorized, which left the 23rd Infantry Regiment in an impossible position, ordered to hold terrain they couldn't effectively defend, facing an enemy they couldn't effectively target, with casualties mounting and no reinforcements available. Captain Herrera called his officers together on the evening of February 17 for a situation briefing that everyone understood was actually a eulogy for the company. "We've got 68 effective combat soldiers left," he said, studying a map that was increasingly irrelevant given the fluid tactical situation. "Ammunition for approximately 6 hours of sustained combat. Mortar tubes we can't use because we can't see targets. And orders to prevent Japanese forces from using this ridge as an artillery observation post." "How?" Lieutenant Santos asked the question everyone was thinking. Herrera didn't answer immediately. He lit another cigarette, his third in the past 10 minutes, and stared at the map as if it might spontaneously reveal a solution. "The Type 92 is the key," he finally said. "If we can eliminate that gun, we break their interlocking fire. Break the interlocking fire, we can potentially maneuver. Maneuver, we can maybe dislodge one or two of their positions. Hold on long enough for the situation to change." Nobody asked what situation change might occur. They all knew there was no cavalry coming. "Volunteers for a gun elimination team?" Herrera asked without hope. Silence filled the dugout. Volunteering for that mission was volunteering to die. Everyone had seen what happened to B Company's assault. Everyone understood that the Type 92's crew had excellent sightlines, prepared fallback positions, and probably orders to fight to the last man. Private First Class Domingo Salcedo stepped forward. "I can destroy the gun, sir," he said quietly. Herrera looked at him with the tired patience of a man who'd heard too many doomed promises. "With what, Salcedo? Prayer and determination?" "Bamboo cannon, sir. 4 weapons. 37 incendiary projectiles. I can provide indirect fire support against positions we can't directly observe." The dugout fell silent. Then Lieutenant Santos started laughing, not mockery, but the desperate, slightly unhinged laughter of a man confronting absurdity during apocalypse. "The farmer's garden gun," Santos said. "We're going to attack a fortified ridge with vegetables." Morrison, who'd been listening from the corner, stepped into the lamplight. "Captain Herrera, I strongly advise against this. We have trained mortar crews with real weapons." "We don't need experimental. Your trained mortar crews can't hit targets they can't see," Salcedo interrupted, then immediately regretted the breach of protocol. "Sir." "With respect, sir." Morrison's face flushed red. "Private, I don't care if you learned engineering from your grandfather's ghost. This is a combat situation requiring professional—" "Let him speak," Herrera said quietly. Salcedo took a breath. "The Japanese positions are concealed from direct observation. Standard artillery requires sightlines or precise coordinates. Bamboo cannon uses indirect fire with incendiary projectiles designed to start fires. Fires create smoke. Smoke reveals positions. Once revealed, mortar crews can provide conventional fire support with accurate targeting data. And if your bamboo explodes and kills you instead," Morrison demanded, "then the tactical situation hasn't changed, sir. We're already losing." The silence stretched. Herrera exchanged glances with Lieutenant Santos, then looked at Morrison, then back to Salcedo. "How many men do you need?" "0, sir. I can operate all 4 weapons myself if necessary, but if we're serious about this, I'd request Private Reyes as a spotter and Private Magno as ammunition handler." "Reyes was wounded today," Herrera said. "Shoulder wound, sir. He can still observe and communicate." Herrera stubbed out his cigarette. You understand that if this fails, you're wasting ammunition we can't replace and time we don't have? Yes, sir. And if it succeeds? Salcedo met his commanding officer's gaze. Then we turn Japanese concealment into a liability. They've built invisible fortresses. Invisible fortresses burn just like visible ones. Morrison made a sound of disgust and turned away. But he didn't issue a direct order to stop the operation, which, in the convoluted hierarchy of military decision-making, constituted grudging permission. You launch at dawn, Herrera said. Coordinate with Lieutenant Santos. If you get killed doing something stupid, I'll put died of agricultural enthusiasm on your casualty report. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Salcedo saluted and left the dugout before anyone could change their minds. Domingo Salcedo didn't sleep. He spent the hours before dawn conducting weapons maintenance with obsessive precision, checking every bamboo segment for structural integrity, inspecting every rattan binding, testing every firing mechanism. Private Magno, a former mechanic from Pampanga, watched with professional interest as Salcedo disassembled and reassembled each weapon 3 separate times. You really think this will work? Magno asked, keeping his voice low to avoid disturbing the soldiers trying to grab a few hours of rest. It has to work, Salcedo replied, not looking up from his inspection. The physics are sound. Bamboo's tensile strength exceeds soft steel in the growth axis. The internal node structure provides natural rifling. Gas expansion in organic chambers follows predictable thermodynamic principles. I didn't understand half those words. It means the weapon won't explode in my face. Probably. Probably is a concerning word when discussing explosives. Salcedo smiled despite the tension. All weapons are probability exercises. This one just has fewer field tests than standard equipment. Private Reyes joined them around 4:30 a.m., his left shoulder heavily bandaged but his hands steady. The medic had cleared him for light duty, which, in the desperate circumstances, meant capable of holding binoculars without dropping them. Captain wants us in position by 0600, Reyes said. Japanese morning stand 2 routine runs from 0530 to 0630. That's when they'll be most alert and least mobile. If we're going to start fires, that's our window. Salcedo nodded. He'd already calculated the timing. Japanese defenders would be in their fighting positions at dawn, expecting potential Allied attacks during the traditional assault window. They wouldn't be moving between bunkers. They'd be static, concentrated, perfect targets, if those targets could be identified and engaged. The 4 bamboo cannons lay disassembled on a ground cloth, each weapon marked with a number carved into its firing chamber. Weapon 1 was the prototype, tested twice, known to be reliable. Weapon 2 had been fired once. Weapons 3 and 4 were untested in combat conditions, a gamble Salcedo accepted because they were better than nothing. The incendiary projectile sat in repurposed ammunition boxes, each bottle carefully wrapped in cloth to prevent breakage during movement. Salcedo had manufactured them from salvaged Seika bottles, Japanese glass, ironically enough, filled with gasoline siphoned from damaged vehicles, thickened with soap shavings to create primitive napalm, and fitted with impact fuses cannibalized from demolition charges. Lieutenant Santos arrived as first light began bleeding through the jungle canopy. Change your plans, he said without preamble. Captain Herrera got nervous about committing resources to an untested weapon system. You're getting 1 chance. 1 weapon, 10 projectiles. If it works, we commit the rest. If it doesn't, we pull you back and try something else. Salcedo's jaw tightened, but he kept his voice level. Sir, the tactical concept requires sustained fire to create enough smoke for 1 weapon. 10 projectiles. That's the order, Salcedo? Yes, sir. Santos paused, then added more quietly. For what it's worth, I hope you prove Morrison wrong. I'm tired of watching good men die attacking invisible bunkers. We'll make them visible, sir. See that you do. Santos departed, leaving Salcedo, Reyes, and Magno to prepare for the mission. They selected Weapon 1, the most tested, most reliable of the 4 bamboo cannons. Magno loaded 10 incendiary projectiles into a canvas pack, distributing the weight carefully to prevent breakage. Reyes checked his binoculars and radio, ensuring communication with the mortar crews who'd be standing by to exploit any targeting information the operation produced. They moved out at 5:45, navigating through pre-dawn darkness along a route that Salcedo had scouted the previous evening. The path led east, then north, then east again, a circuitous approach designed to avoid the most heavily defended sectors while positioning them for indirect fire solutions against the ridge's central positions. The collapsed nipa hut that would serve as their firing position sat in a small clearing approximately 70 meters from the nearest confirmed Japanese bunker. It wasn't ideal, too close for comfort, too exposed for safety, but it offered clear sky above for projectile arcs and sufficient concealment to survive the initial moments of contact. Salcedo assembled Weapon 1 with practiced efficiency. The segments locked together cleanly, the rattan bindings held firm, and the firing mechanism seated properly on the first attempt. He braced the weapon across a broken water basin, elevating the barrel to approximately 45 degrees, and calculated firing solutions using a combination of remembered physics and educated guesswork. Range to primary target? He asked Reyes. The spotter consulted his map and binoculars. 70 to 80 meters, elevated position, bearing 085 degrees. Wind? Negligible. Light breeze from the southwest. Salcedo loaded the first projectile Asako bottle filled with thickened gasoline. Wrapped in cloth, fitted with a blasting cap modified to detonate on impact. The bottle weighed approximately 1 kilogram. The bamboo cannon could theoretically throw it 150 meters under optimal conditions. 70 meters was well within performance parameters. He checked his watch, 1:0612 hours. The Japanese Type 92 heavy machine gun opened fire at 0615, right on schedule with their morning harassment routine. Tracer rounds lanced through the jungle, targeting suspected Allied positions with methodical precision. Return fire from B Company's defensive line was sporadic and ineffective rifles, and light machine guns against a fortified position that American artillery couldn't hit. "Ready?" Salcedo asked Magno, who'd positioned himself as loader. "Ready." "Reyes, confirm communication with mortar crews." The spotter pressed his radio handset. "Fire support. This is Observation 1. Radio check." The reply crackled back immediately. "Observation 1. We read you 5 by 5. Standing by." Salcedo took one final breath, steadied his hands on the firing mechanism, and made peace with the possibility that the next few seconds might be his last. "Fire in the hole," he said quietly, and triggered the bamboo cannon. The weapon spoke with a voice that was nothing like conventional artillery, not the sharp crack of rifles, not the rolling thunder of howitzers, but a deep, hollow two-prompt that seemed to emerge from the earth itself, primordial, resonant, utterly alien to modern warfare's mechanical symphony. The bamboo cannon bucked against its makeshift mount, absorbed the recoil through its natural flexibility, and settled back into position without shattering. The projectile arced through the morning air, trailing cloth streamers, and disappeared into the jungle canopy 70 meters distant. For one terrible second, Salcedo thought he'd miscalculated entirely. Wrong trajectory, wrong elevation, wrong everything. Then the first impact detonation painted the jungle orange. The sake bottle hit a tree branch 30 meters short of the intended target, exploded in a sphere of igniting gasoline, and set fire to everything within a 5-meter radius. Flames climbed the tree trunk, spread through the canopy, and generated enough smoke to create a visible column rising through the jungle cover. "Short!" Reyes called out. Binoculars pressed to his eyes. "Adjust elevation up, bearing steady." Salcedo made the adjustment, increasing the barrel angle by approximately 3 degrees. Magno loaded the second projectile. The Type 92 machine gun was still firing, but its crew hadn't identified the bamboo cannon's position. Yet the weapon's report was too quiet, too different from expected threats. Second shot. Twomp. This projectile flew further, clearer, and impacted directly against what Salcedo had designated as the primary target zone. The explosion bloomed like a flower made of fire, splashing burning gasoline across approximately 8 meters of jungle hillside. For 3 heartbeats, nothing happened. Then the secondary explosions began. Japanese ammunition stored near the bunker cooked off in staccato chains of detonations. Smoke poured from a concealed entrance that had been invisible 30 seconds earlier. And most critically, the Type 92 heavy machine gun stopped firing. "Target," Reyes shouted into his radio. "Bearing 085, range 75 meters, smoke marking, fire for effect." The American mortar crews had been waiting for exactly this moment. Within 90 seconds, the first 81mm mortar rounds began falling on the now visible Japanese position. They landed with the professional precision of trained artillery crews, who'd simply been lacking accurate targeting data. The bamboo cannon had given them what conventional observation couldn't: a burning beacon marking enemy positions with absolute clarity. Salcedo didn't stop to celebrate. "Next target," he called to Reyes. "Secondary position, bearing 100, estimate 80 meters. Third shot. Twomp." The projectile sailed in a perfect parabola and detonated against the hillside, starting another fire. This one spread faster. The jungle here was drier, more susceptible to flame. Within moments, a second smoke column rose into the morning sky. Japanese defenders began to understand what was happening. Rifle fire erupted from multiple positions, all aimed at the general vicinity of the collapsed Niba hut. Rounds snapped through the air around Salcedo's position, forcing Magno to take cover. But the Japanese were firing blind. They could hear the bamboo cannon, could see where projectiles were landing, but couldn't identify the weapon's exact location because it looked and sounded like nothing in their threat recognition training. Fourth shot. Fifth shot. Sixth shot. Each projectile found a new target, each impact created a new fire, and each fire revealed another previously invisible bunker. The American mortar crews worked in beautiful synchronization, dropping high explosive rounds onto positions marked by Salcedo's incendiaries. Japanese defensive coordination began to collapse under the dual assault fires, destroying concealment, mortars destroying fighting positions, and the psychological impact of being systematically revealed after months of successfully hiding. "Observation 1. This is Captain Herrera," the radio crackled. "Confirm you have enemy positions burning?" "Confirmed," Reyes replied, his voice pitched high with excitement. "Multiple positions marked, mortar fire achieving direct hits, enemy defensive fire decreasing." A Japanese Type 89 grenade launcher round exploded 15 meters from their position. The blast wave knocked Salcedo sideways, showering him with dirt and vegetation. His ears rang, his vision blurred, but his hands, operating on trained muscle memory, were already reaching for the seventh projectile. "Keep firing!" he shouted, unable to hear his own voice over the ringing. Magno, bleeding from a shrapnel wound on his forearm, loaded the seventh bottle into the bamboo cannon's breech. Salcedo adjusted aim based on Reyes's hand signals. The spotter's radio had been damaged in the blast and triggered another shot. Twomp. The projectile hit a bunker entrance directly, splashing burning gasoline into the confined space. Japanese soldiers emerged from the position, some on fire, all seeking escape from an untenable situation. B Company's riflemen, who'd been pinned down for the past 18 hours, suddenly had clear targets and responded with devastating effect. Eighth shot, ninth shot, 10th shot. The final projectile, Salcedo's last incendiary round, darted through smoke-filled air and detonated against what reconnaissance had designated as the Japanese command bunker. The explosion triggered a massive secondary detonation as stored ammunition, demolition charges, and possibly fuel ignited in a fireball that rose above the jungle canopy and could be seen from battalion headquarters 3 kilometers away. The Type 92 heavy machine gun, which had dominated the eastern ridge for 3 days, was completely silent. Salcedo collapsed against the water basin, gasping for breath, his entire body shaking from adrenaline exhaustion. Around him, the jungle burned in 17 separate locations, each fire marking a Japanese position that had been invisible minutes earlier. American mortars continued to fall in precisely calculated patterns, exploiting the targeting data that 10 bamboo cannon shots had provided. Private Reyes grabbed the damaged radio and, with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, managed to transmit fire support observation 1. All primary targets marked. Recommend sustained suppression fire and immediate infantry assault. The ridge is open. Repeat. The ridge is open. Captain Herrera's voice came back immediately, carrying an emotion that might have been hope. Observation 1. Confirm you broke their defensive line? Reyes looked at Salcedo. at the smoking bamboo cannon, at the fires painting the hillside orange. Affirmative, sir. 1 weapon, 10 shots. The farmer's cannon works. The assault on the eastern ridge began at 0730 hours. B Company, reinforced with reserves that Captain Herrera had been holding back for exactly this opportunity, moved up the hill through the smoke and chaos that Salcedo's bamboo cannon had created. They encountered scattered resistance Japanese soldiers fighting from damaged positions, disorganized and deprived of their interlocking fire advantage. The attack that had cost 43 casualties the previous day was completed in 90 minutes, with 11 wounded and 0 killed. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison watched the assault's success from the battalion observation post and said nothing for a long time. Finally, he turned to his operations officer and issued a single sentence: "Get me every piece of bamboo in Bataan and find me someone who knows how to build more of those cannons." By noon, Domingo Salcedo had been summoned to battalion headquarters. He arrived still covered in mud and gunpowder residue, expecting either commendation or reprimand, the binary outcomes of military innovation. Instead, he found himself standing in front of a gathering that included Morrison, Captain Herrera, Major General Edward King, commanding all forces on Bataan, and an American ordnance specialist who'd been flown in from Corregidor specifically to examine the bamboo cannon. The specialist, Captain Warren from the Army Corps of Engineers, had disassembled Weapon 1 and was studying its components with the intense focus of a man reassessing fundamental assumptions about artillery design. "It shouldn't work," Warren said without looking up. "The tolerances are inconsistent, the materials are organic and therefore unpredictable, there's no standardization between components, and the manufacturing quality would fail every specification we have for artillery systems." He paused, set down the bamboo segment he'd been examining, and finally met Salcedo's eyes. "And yet it works beautifully, better than it has any right to. The bamboo's natural structure provides barrel strength equivalent to soft steel. The node ridges create rifling without machining. The flexibility absorbs recoil that would destroy a rigid metal tube. It's genius disguised as improvisation." General King stepped forward. "Private Salcedo, I'm told you tried to demonstrate this weapon to your company commander 3 weeks ago and were dismissed as wasting time on agricultural experiments." "Yes, sir." "And you built 4 complete weapons anyway." "Yes, sir." "Why?" Salcedo considered several possible answers: duty, innovation, desperation, before settling on the truth. "Because conventional weapons weren't working, sir. The Japanese had adapted to our tactics. We needed something unexpected. Something that played to our advantages instead of our limitations. We have bamboo. We have soldiers who understand bamboo. We don't have unlimited steel or factory production. So I built what we could build." King nodded slowly. "Captain Warren, how quickly can we produce more of these weapons?" Warren did some mental calculations. "If we mobilize local craftsmen and establish quality control standards, we could potentially manufacture 50 to 60 units per week, using resources already available on Bataan. The limiting factor is trained operators, not materials." "Then we train operators," King said decisively. He turned to Morrison. "Colonel, I'm authorizing immediate establishment of a bamboo artillery training program. Private Salcedo will serve as primary instructor. We'll designate this as the Special Weapons Unit and give it priority for personnel and resources." Morrison's face had gone through several shades of red during this exchange. To his credit, he managed to keep his voice level when he responded. "Sir, with respect, we're institutionalizing a weapon system designed by a private with no formal engineering training." "Correct," King said. "And that private has achieved more battlefield success in 1 morning than our formally trained engineers accomplished in 3 days. I don't care if the weapon was designed by a farmer with a 3rd-grade education. I care that it works." He paused, then added, "Colonel Morrison, I appreciate your concern for proper procedure, but we're fighting a war we're losing, on ground we can barely hold, with resources that are running out. This is not the time for credentialism. This is the time for results." Morrison saluted stiffly. "Yes, sir." King turned back to Salcedo. Sergeant Salcedo. Effective immediately, you've got 1 week to train 20 operators and produce enough weapons to support the next defensive operation. Can you do it?" Domingo Salcedo, who 12 hours earlier had been dismissed as an eccentric farmer playing with garden implements, stood at attention and gave the only answer that made sense. "Yes, sir. We'll need bamboo from the northern provinces, rattan from Olongapo, and glass bottles from anywhere we can find them. And, sir, we'll need authorization to requisite sate bottles from captured Japanese supplies." King actually smiled. "Sergeant, you have authorization to requisite anything that helps us kill Japanese soldiers more effectively. Use their own bottles to burn their own bunkers. Poetic justice." Training program began that afternoon. Salcedo, assisted by Privates Reyes and Magno, set up an improvised artillery school in a cleared area behind the regimental headquarters. The first class consisted of 11 soldiers volunteers drawn from various units, selected for mechanical aptitude rather than formal education. Salcedo taught them everything: bamboo selection, structural assessment, binding techniques, firing mechanisms, trajectory calculation, and the improvised chemistry required to manufacture reliable incendiary projectiles. He discovered he was a natural instructor. The formal education he'd never received actually worked in his favor. He explained concepts in plain language rather than technical jargon, demonstrated rather than lectured, and encouraged questions from soldiers who'd been taught that questioning authority was insubordination. His teaching method was simple: show them the physics, let them build a weapon, let them fire it, then let them improve the design based on observed results. Within 3 days, the training program had produced 14 functional bamboo cannons and 23 trained operators. Within a week, that number doubled. The weapons proved their worth during a Japanese assault on the Western Defensive Line on February 24. 6 bamboo cannons operated by Salcedo's graduates marked 19 enemy positions in the first 20 minutes of combat. American artillery and mortar crews, now equipped with accurate targeting data, systematically destroyed each marked position. The assault collapsed after 3 hours, with Japanese forces retreating under cover of smoke from their own burning positions. Word spread through the Allied defensive network with the speed of legend: the Filipino Farmers' Weapon Works. Soldiers who'd mocked Salcedo's bamboo cannons 3 weeks earlier now requested transfers to the Special Weapons Unit. Officers who dismissed the concept as agricultural nonsense now competed to have bamboo artillery attached to their commands. Even Morrison, rigid and proud Morrison, issued a formal commendation acknowledging that unconventional approaches to tactical problems represent the highest form of military innovation. But the strategic situation on Bataan continued to deteriorate. Japanese reinforcements arrived faster than they could be killed. American supplies dwindled faster than they could be replaced. Disease, malnutrition, and exhaustion eroded combat effectiveness more efficiently than any enemy action. By early April, it was clear that Mount Samat would fall, that Bataan would fall, that the entire defensive position was collapsing under the weight of mathematical inevitability. General King issued the surrender order on April 9, 1945. 76,000 American and Filipino soldiers became prisoners of war. Most would not survive the Bataan Death March or the years of captivity that followed. Domingo Salcedo, now a technical sergeant and commander of the Special Weapons Unit, destroyed his remaining bamboo cannons before surrendering. He refused to let the Japanese capture or study the weapons that had caused them so much trouble. He spent 3 years in Camp O'Donnell, then Cabanatuan, surviving through a combination of luck, stubborn refusal to die, and the same patient observation that had led him to build bamboo cannons. He studied Japanese guard routines, learned to identify which officers could be reasoned with and which were sadists, and shared what food he could scavenge with soldiers too sick to care for themselves. Liberation came in January 1945, when American forces retook the Philippines. Sergeant Salcedo weighed 93 pounds, suffered from malaria and dysentery, and had lost all his teeth to malnutrition. But he was alive and he was free. And when American intelligence officers asked him about the bamboo artillery that had appeared in after-action reports from Bataan, he smiled with ruined gums and said, "I can rebuild them. If you give me bamboo and time, I can rebuild them all." The post-war Philippine military incorporated bamboo artillery into its unconventional warfare doctrine. Not because the weapons remained tactically superior to modern artillery. They didn't. Industrial production had resumed. proper steel tubes were available, and formal engineering standards had been reestablished. But the concept endured that indigenous materials, local expertise, and innovative thinking could create battlefield advantages that conventional approaches couldn't match. Domingo Salcedo never returned to farming. He accepted a commission as a second lieutenant in the post-war Philippine Army, eventually rising to lieutenant colonel before retiring in 1968. He spent his military career teaching unconventional warfare tactics, emphasizing adaptation over doctrine, creativity over conformity, and the principle that the best weapon is the one that actually works, regardless of whether it appears in any field manual. His bamboo cannons were displayed in the Philippine Military Academy's museum, alongside formal documentation explaining their design, construction, and battlefield employment. Generations of cadets studied them as examples of tactical innovation under resource constraints. Some laughed at the primitive construction. Others understood the deeper lesson that warfare favors those who can adapt their thinking to available resources rather than those who demand resources that match their thinking. Lieutenant Colonel Morrison, who dismissed Salcedo's weapon as agricultural nonsense, wrote a formal letter of apology in 1952. Salcedo never responded, not out of bitterness, but because he considered the matter resolved. The bamboo cannons had proven themselves in combat. That was the only validation that mattered. The eastern ridge of Mount Samet became a memorial site after the war. Filipino veterans who'd fought there would occasionally visit, standing in the jungle that had regrown over the bunkers and trenches, remembering the morning when a farmer with a bamboo tube had accomplished what American artillery couldn't, making the invisible visible, turning concealment into liability, and proving that ingenuity matters more than credentials. In his retirement, Salcedo returned to Hermosa and rebuilt his family's farm. He grew rice, vegetables, and bamboo, especially bamboo. He never spoke about the war unless specifically asked, and even then, his answers were brief and factual. He didn't consider himself a hero. He'd simply been a soldier who noticed a problem and built a solution using materials that everyone else had overlooked. Domingo Salcedo died in 1989, at age 70, surrounded by family. His funeral was attended by more than 300 veterans, many of whom had never met him personally but knew the legend. The Filipino farmer who turned agricultural material into artillery, who'd proven that the most devastating weapons aren't always forged in factories, and who demonstrated that sometimes the most important military credential is the willingness to imagine what others consider impossible. His grave marker in the Hermosa Municipal Cemetery carries no mention of bamboo cannons or battlefield innovation. It simply states his name, his rank, and a single line that his children selected from hundreds of possible memorial phrases. He made thunder from what others called weeds. The bamboo he planted around the family farm still grows there, reaching toward the sky just as it did when Lolo Pol taught a quiet boy that strength comes from flexibility and understanding rather than rigidity and force. And every year on February 18, the anniversary of the Eastern Ridge battle, current members of the Philippine Army's Special Warfare Command visit his grave and leave a single offering, a length of bamboo, carefully selected, perfectly straight, representing both memory and promise. No one ever doubted him again.